How's it going, guys? It's Grizzle and welcome to Evolve Stage 2. With this new update there has been many big changes to the game, one of which is the fact that now all hunters have access to the dome. Because of this massive change, it means there's loads of other factors you have to take into account that has actually changed up how the game works. Originally it was only the trapper that had access to the dome, and also the trapper was the dome's lifeline, so if the trapper went down then the dome would come down, which wasn't a very good aspect to the game. Then other toxic factors where if you had a bad trapper you wouldn't be able to catch the monster, and then you maybe have a trapper that's way too good and can throw certain god domes that were really toxic for the monster to play against. Don't worry, the trapper still has a very important role in tracking and nerfing the monster, and technically is still primarily the one that's going to try and trap the monster. It's just now a fantastic advantage that your whole team can dome as well. So how do you actually deploy the dome? Well, when you get line of sight of the monster or a hunter does damage to the monster within a certain range, a prompt appears and all you have to do is hold down F by default. You can of course change that key if you prefer, and then after a short cast time the dome will deploy directly on top of the monster. Just so you know, the exact cast range, it is 45 meters. Now because the dome deploys directly above the monster, it means you can't throw domes accurately anymore, so god domes are now out of the question. They do still happen if you get very lucky, but either way it's basically a fantastic way of removing that toxic part of the game. So you're probably wondering how the dome comes down. Well, I can tell you now that the monster can't kill anyone to make the dome come down straight away, but they can definitely kill hunters to make the dome come down faster. The second you dome a monster, a 5-minute timer begins. Now don't worry, if you are a monster you're not going to be in the dome for a whole 5 minutes unless you completely mitigate, but in this new build you'd be very stupid to mitigate for that length of time because the game works completely differently. And the way they've created the dome and the new dropship makes it so that running till stage 3 and mitigating doesn't really help you. So how do you actually take time off the dome? Well, this can happen in two ways. If a monster gets a hunter down, 3.5 minutes are taken off the timer. Now that's a really large chunk of the timer, so it's definitely worth fighting at all stages. Even stage 1 is much stronger than before and you can still get down penalties. The other way the timer can be reduced is if the hunters do a certain amount of damage to the monster. Depending on how much damage the hunters do, 60-second chunks get taken off the timer. To be more precise, if the hunters do 4% of health damage to a stage 1 monster, that's 60 seconds off the clock. Then to a stage 2 monster they have to do 6.5% of the health damage, and finally at stage 3 they have to do 8.5% of damage for that time to come off the clock. If you want to check the details on that for yourself, the patch notes are in the description which explains all. Now there are still good and bad domes and areas you want to avoid doming in, but now if you do happen to get a bad dome with a lot of loops, it's definitely not the end of the world. And again, that's for two reasons. One, what I've just explained, so basically monsters benefit a lot more from actually fighting you and not mitigating, which in turn makes the game so much more fun. But if you really have monsters that just simply want to run around the dome for 5 minutes, they technically are just killing themselves by doing so because of how now the dropship works. For those of you that don't know, the way the dropship timer used to work was very simple. If a hunter died, the dropship timer would start, which would be 2 minutes, but then you have to add on an extra 21 seconds to that because the animation in the dropship was long as fuck. Well, that has now changed, and probably one of my most favourite changes to the game. Now when the hunters get deployed into the map, the dropship timer starts at 0. The monster can add time to the dropship by doing two things. For a start, if the monster gets a stage up, 25 seconds is added to the dropship timer. But then more importantly, and how this kind of ties in with the dome, every single time the monster gets a hunter down, an additional 10 seconds is added to the dropship timer. And so like I said, yeah, there are good and bad domes, but if you do get a particularly bad dome, it is definitely not the end of the world because the monster benefits so much more by fighting you and trying to get those down penalties. Now don't worry, there is a maximum cap on the dropship timer of 2 minutes, so you can't get any longer than that, or in other words, monsters can't constantly farm so many strikes that the dropship timer is just a ridiculous time. I did mention it in my other video, but it's also fantastic because the dropship timer is actually accurate, and literally the second the dropship timer hits 0, you will drop in with no bullshit long ass animation. A couple of things you should also know about the dome. Any hunter can take down the dome at any time by simply pressing the button that they allocated to actually putting up the dome. Then the cooldown for the dome is shared amongst the hunters and is a 80-second cooldown, which is a little bit more than the old dome cooldown, but to be honest, it is definitely needed, especially since all hunters now have access to it. it. Finally, a problem that was in the old Evolve, hunters used to hold out the dome as long as possible, and then literally the second the monster started to run, then they would dome so they would get more time fighting the monster. Well, to counteract that, if the monster gets a hunter down while the dome is still not deployed, then a 10-second delay goes on the dome, so it gives the monster a chance to get away and get more armor. Anyway guys, that is the way the dome now works, and all I can say is I way prefer it, and I'm almost positive all of you will prefer it as well. You probably will get a better idea of how it feels when you actually get to play the game, but trust me, it makes so much sense and plays out really smoothly. It also in turn means there's a lot more fighting, which is the most enjoyable part of the game, and I really can't wait for you guys to try it. Anyway, that's just one of the many changes that have come to the game, but anyway, leave a like if you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.